And to follow the procedure, I would suggest, again, if you have any questions, immediately to your talk. And I also want to point out to you that you bought a lot of material. And I was very excited to see it because you can actually, try it out. Because you bought some pencils, you bought the chalk and the graphite, and we have some sheets of paper, so you can actually touch it and
it's to do it yourself.
Yeah,
to do the copying technique. This copying, which some people will have done anyway when they were children.
Yeah, but we would like to invite you all to do.
You're very welcome.
Right.
We have these abrasions in our literature painting. Why didn't the snowflakes fade away or go away or were wiped away?
It's a very good question. In fact, lead white, which would be what the snowflakes were made of, in oil, oxidizes very hard and polymerizes very well, whereas the black sort of glazy paint would have remained very sensitive to solvents. It's much more soluble, unfortunately. That's why often paintings in general are stripped of their glazes, because the glazes are more soluble. Whereas lead when it dries extremely hard and remains.
Yeah, I think this is the question often, what pigments did he really use? We know some pigments, like the lead white, we think of the smalt, we are not 100% sure, but do you know anything about the other pigments?
Some. I mean, we had recently the De Le Grit, which is in the Mavanenberg, this large painting for cleaning and restoration, and we did a huge amount of research on the pigments as well. Mm-hmm. And some of them, azurite, for instance, which is a wonderful blue, copper blue, over time, that has become almost black, in fact. And then there's another, he used a pigment called copper resonate, which is also a copper-based pigment, and that over time becomes brown. Oh. And so you've got some areas that should have been green that are now brown. And you can know that nowadays because you can do what we call XRF mapping, X-ray fluorescence mapping, to find out the different elements and where they are. Then you can work out what pigments you've got, as well as doing further analysis.
And you did this with De Le Grit, or?
This was during the last 2 years before the exhibition.
Okay.
The painting came to the Institute for Restoration and Research. So we took the opportunity to try and analyse most of his pigment. It's a limited palette in those days. Oh. And you get kind of used to it when you see, and as I pointed out, that smalt is a shame. It's a lot of paintings where the blues have simply become grey. Oh. So you have to know kind of what your pigments are to be able to know, am I seeing what Bruegel originally intended, or has it kind of changed over the years slightly? And the relationships between different colours change over the years. But your painting is in good condition, apart from that little bit of abrasion, I think, on the roof. It's in great condition.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because in the copy also, it's the same colour distortion. So probably in the copy also smalt was used.
I think so as well. I think that's surprising. But he would have recognised, the copyist was obviously somebody who knew what he was doing. Yeah, he would have recognised that. I mean, if he'd used another blue, then it would have still be there. Yeah, that's sometimes the case, and that copies retain their colour and not the original. There's the Sermon of St. John the Baptist, for instance. In the foreground, you have a gypsy in what everybody's always described as a pale yellow robe. And in all the copies, it's blue. It's smalt. That has really gone completely, that colour. So it's totally transformed the painting because it's the major figure in the foreground. Yeah.
What I found very interesting in the beginning when you were... Do you hear me? Well, okay.
Yes.
When you were mentioning that you were sure that there was no collaborations and that you could see it in the style of the paintbrush. So I was wondering, once we have the chance to talk to a specialist like you, in other artworks from other artists, where you see collaborations clearly, how is this?
See collaborations?
Collaborations.
Collaboration, Sorry. Well, it's a stylistic thing.
But would you see it in the way the brush stroke is applied?
Yeah, I mean, one of the main people who collaborated in those days was, a bit later, Rubens and Jan Bruegel, for instance. And Rubens was the master of flesh and figures. And Jan Bruegel was a master of almost miniature painting, flower painting, mythological painting. So Jan Bruegel would do the whole background. You've got lots of allegories of sight, and Rubens puts the sort of figures in afterwards, and the whole brushwork is totally different. And so you can see those, but often in Antwerp at the beginning of the 17th century, there were quite a few of these collaborations between artists, and they did what they were best at. So Rubens was good at the figures, he'd do the figures, and Jan Bruegel would do the background, all the details, all the natural details, still life details. You see the brushwork is different. I mean, Jan Bruegel is much smaller brushwork and Rubens is slightly more loose. But it's obvious, but they wanted it. That's what they were intending to have the best of one and the best of the other in the same painting, really. Henri de Blesse also sometimes. Henri de Blesse was a famous landscape painter. Dominique talked about Patinir, but Henri Blesse sort of followed on from Patinir. He collaborated with artists, was it Lambrecht? No, I can't remember the name of him now. Van Noort, for the figures, because Henri Blesse was the specialist of the landscape and the rocks in the background and not figures. So there's quite a few when he collaborated as well.
I can speak without a microphone. Okay. I have a question about the humor in the painting. Now, we've seen a lot of humor in the Bosch type of Darstellungen, of representations, but here I've seen only one thing. The boy or the girl, it was mentioned it was a girl, but
It could be a boy.
Could be a boy as well.
We don't know really.
And you see him just going towards the hole where he's going to fall in. That's the one thing. And I didn't realize before that De Le Griet was made in the year he married. How ironical. There's certainly a bit of humor there, perhaps.
There's a lot of humour. Oh my gosh, should we start on the De Le Griet? We've gone for 2 hours.
Please do.
Yeah, but it's true. The little girl, I think you pointed it out, Dominique, the little girl, that her mother is there trying to catch her attention. If you go back and look at the painting now, you'll see somebody leaning over the wall trying to... I'm not sure if that's supposed to be funny. It's kind of... I don't think it's really amusing. I think it's just... It's something lively and to notice, but it's not really humour in this painting.
You don't know what the future brings because you don't see the future. It's in back of you, as it were.
True, but it's danger, you know. It's this.
Yeah, and I think it's another mother-child emotional interaction. You know.
Yes. Yeah.
The snow in the background has a yellow touch to me. Was that done on purpose or was it aging of the white lead?
That's a very good question. In fact, I was almost going to mention it, and I thought, because so I looked at the copy you've got, the photograph of the copy, and that is also not bright white either. And you've got with the winter landscape with bird trap as well. We showed it's also fairly yellow now. There's a certain degree to do with the varnish, which yellows over time. That's clear, and there probably is a little bit of yellowed varnish on the adoration. And if you cleaned it, it would come out a little bit cooler. But the oil medium and I think even the priming layer does yellow slightly over time as well. So it's never going to be quite as bright white as it would have been at the beginning. I think it definitely was whiter at the beginning because the cool effect of snow is something Bruegel would have searched for. And I do think it's more yellow nowadays. But it's best now we have it, now you can go and see how it is, because in illustration, you can do everything you want with colour changing. So that's why it's best to see the painting.
Yeah, maybe at this point we can move over and maybe there are some more questions for the two of you. And
in those days, artists were, very good technicians. They knew what they were doing.
Especially in Flemish art.
With the tradition of Van Eyck.
Yes, it was a tradition, and yes, they were well known for the quality of their painting, not only about the invention, which was quite important too, of course, but the quality, the handmade painting was perfect, and this was quite typical for the Flemish painters.
Yeah, and also, as I was mentioning, the idea of when you're painting, you don't just paint one layer over another, you leave a reserve for the next layer to come so that the drying is not so long and you don't get cracks on the layer above. You know, they knew that if they painted one layer over another too soon, then
it would crack immediately.
You'd get drying cracks. So they were skilled in that respect. They knew that. And their paintings would take time, and they'd allow certain colours would dry faster than others, and they know all that. They knew all that.
Yeah.
Certain colours have secretive properties. Lead, you add a bit of lead, it dries things quicker, but some of the umbers need more time, so they'd know. Yeah.
And do you have an idea what sort of brushes they used? And the brushes were made out of this special marder. What's the English word for marder?
They've used sort of two types probably. They have one's made of hog hair, what we call hog hair from a male pig. That would get the stiff brush would be used for some purposes, and then you'd have ones that are made for all these little animals like squirrels' tails and things would be made.
And they must have been
animals.
really tiny also, but also for miniature painting of course.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It'd have different animals' tails written. And they.
You have a question immediately?
I understood that we now have a fingerprint of Leonardo da Vinci in a portrait. Do we have a Bruegel fingerprint?
We have more than one. I mean, we had more than one. When I was doing my PhD, I have to say the winter landscape with bird trap, which I was examining, we hadn't really found out about the dendrochronology being the same as the other trees. I was looking for another way of saying, is this authentic or not? And there was that one fingerprint in the hole in the ice. And I found a fingerprint in about 4 other paintings by Bruegel. And we sent them along to a Serge Lodrini, a police officer.
Compare them.
He was a friend he's a police officer who was following Dominique's class in art history in Liège. That's right. So I sent all these photographs to him, hoping he might find, you need, with the fingerprints, you need a certain amount of common traits, right? He didn't find enough.
But we saw one in the waterhole, wasn't there?
Yeah, that's the one. That was the one I wanted to identify. If that's Bruegel's fingerprint, that's him. But so I think it has potential. It really does. But you have to have big enough fingerprint. And sometimes I don't think it's just the finger. They just, they used their hands or fingers simply to take off a bit of material, and it could be there, it could be there. So it's difficult to identify.
Yeah, and just last week we found a hair in our painting. When you look at the macro photography, you actually see a hair. It's beneath the chimney. And we just discovered it last week. So now we have to think about it.
DNA analysis.
Yeah,
definitely. There's no reason why not, really.
Yeah, but would it be possible? I don't know. But isn't it because then it's really inverse if you have to take it out? And
I don't think you need much to do. I don't know how much you need for DNA analysis.
Roots from the hair.
Do you?
Oh, really? Yeah?
It's actually dead, isn't it, when it comes
Oh, I was so excited about it.
Something in the cells that you can still research and find maybe something, but it's not complicated.
So we should ask your policeman again if he can do something about it.
Something else, yes.
Yeah.
How long it would have taken to paint this away? How long was it taken to do a piece?
Well, I'm not sure we can work that out. We can see from date paintings how many did in a year of that date. But then we've got 42 surviving paintings by Bruegel, so there's probably lots missing. So from 1563, you've got the De la Crete, which is huge. You've got the Adoration, that one. You've got the return on the flight to Egypt. No, the rest on the flight to Egypt.
Yes.
That's 3. From 63. But it was
I think that's...
So you've got 42 paintings between about 1556 and 1569.
painted a lot.
Painted, and that's a lot. And some of them were large scale, as you've seen, and they're full of detail and full of observation and obviously research from drawings. So I think he must have painted quite quickly, but I can't say how long.
There was
But he did
also
produce
the
a
series
lot.
of the month
Yeah,
with 6 paintings.
that's true.
And the same year, which was 1565, he also painted the winter landscape with the bird trap. So
5 huge
many
paintings.
paintings for 1 year. Yeah.
And not to mention all of the drawings. Not to mention all of the drawings for Hieronymus Koch.
Yes, although
Yes.
I imagine there were more done in the 50s.
Yes.
Oh, they were.
Yes. Yes.
I think that,
He drew a lot in the 50s and in the 60s. Apparently, he became more and more a painter. And when he was living in Brussels, he had not the same context with Hieronymus Koch. And it was difficult for him to provide him with new drawings. You can see this with the series of the seasons. He was not able to finish it. He made one drawing in 1565, I think, the second one in 1568, and then he had not finished it when he died in 1569. That's why Hans Bohr was asked to finish the series. At that time, he didn't make many drawings because he was
Working on
yes, he was a painter.
but he was drawing, so his drawings he was doing in the 60s were his preparatory drawings for painting, these model drawings that we would have been lost. And what we didn't talk about today is because the adoration simply wasn't done like that, is that for instance, the children's games, for the battle between Carnival and Lent done in 59 and for various others in the 60s, we think that Bruegel the Elder also made cartoons in order to transfer his paintings to panel using the pouncing technique. And sometimes Bruegel the Younger would have inherited those same cartoons and used them again himself. We worked that out from sort of deduction, in fact, and from, well, various, it's just too big a story to explain, but we worked it out. He must have used cartoons, and the underdrawings in those cases are much more details in the originals, as if he's used the same technique finally his son used 40 years later.
I'm bemused that anything got lost and paintings got that's another story, but I think this would have been mentioned already, but is it not possible that any of his lost paintings would have enough models for copies to be made of them, so copies exist of paintings that don't?
That are lost. Yes.
If you know what I mean.
That's very possible. That happens with, lots of Van Eycks are like that. With Van Eyck, for instance, you've got lost paintings only known through the copies.
Yeah.
But do we know any lost Bruegels known through the copies?
Maybe, but we are not sure that there were originals by
Nothing
Bruegel, the crucifixion. Yeah. And
Oh, yes.
Yes, of
Yes.
course.
Okay,
Of
we have
course.
an example. Go on then.
we think that some paintings by Peter Bruegel the Younger could derive from originals by Bruegel that have been lost.
Right.
Yeah, there's a very important crucifixion, we think, which is lost, which is represented in the copies. It's true. And it doesn't exist anymore. In fact, in our book, we've got a picture, haven't we? Right? Yeah. Number 2. Can we got crucifixion?
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, crucifixion. And that's at the end. Yeah. Do we?
Je sais pas, je crois. So
Yeah, that one. This. This is probably after a lost painting. Only known in the copies. That's one. Oh, and the wedding dance. Yes, the small wedding dance.
yes, but it's a special case.
This one.
Yeah.
There's no original painting of this. Oh yeah, but there's loads of versions by Bruegel the Younger. Even though Bruegel the Elder, you see the figures. He reuses sort of figures in the late Detroit peasant wedding. So it's a sort of motifs that he liked. But this particular small one, I think there was a lost painting. There was a painting.
there obviously isn't a version of Spring, which you showed.
Well, we'd like to see that. But this...
Actually, there are not copies after the month. There are no copies by Peter Bruegel the Younger, which is quite a mystery. He was not able to see the originals, and probably there was no drawing, no preparatory material, so he was not able to copy them. The only testimony of somebody having seen those paintings is a drawing by a landscapist of the late 16th century, whose name is Peter Stevens, but it's only a drawing, a little drawing, which is quite interesting because there is inscription, there is a legend telling us that what is depicted corresponds to 2 months. That's thanks to this drawing, we were able to identify the month that Bruegel had represented, had depicted in each painting. But actually, for this series, there are no copies.
There's no exact copies, but there are certain motifs that come back. And Jan Bruegel, we've got that one, haven't we? This one. Isn't that one?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a painting by Jan Bruegel the Elder, a landscape, and at the front you can see motifs that come from one of the months. The return of the hunters, right? Return of the So Jan Bruegel and Peter Bruegel the Younger must have inherited sometimes parts of sort of drawings that were sketches, probably, and that's why you suddenly see them in their versions. But it's a matter of deduction.
And what's interesting, I don't know if we already mentioned it, the sons, they were really young when Peter Bruegel the Elder died. Peter Bruegel the Younger was just 5 years old and Jan just 1 year. So there must have been a gap, really, because Peter Bruegel the Younger, he couldn't just start to paint and use the material his father left him. And this is, I think, the really interesting phase, what happened during this maybe 15 years till Peter Bruegel the Younger could really start, and where was the material during this time, and maybe it was, then also the mother in my,
Yes, the mother-in-law, Maiken, who was married to Peter Cook van Elst, she would have appreciated that all these materials, these studio materials, would be extremely useful for her grandsons to make a business one day. So she would have kept it very carefully. That's what we think. But she would have kept that and then given it to the elder son, who would then have sort of exploited it fully.
The job of the widow.
Yes. The widow was very often in those days a person who would take over the whole workshop. When I think of printers who have died and their widows then continue under their own name, or we'll say widow of.
It's true.
This is very often the case. So they would keep everything and then perhaps marry again, perhaps not.
Yes, Hieronymus Cox's widow was a businesswoman, and she inherited the material, the plates used by Hieronymus Cox, and was able to use for herself. She was a businesswoman, really, and afterwards they were transmitted to other editors, but beforehand she had used them at the death of her husband. Yes.
I think we sometimes forget about how women were held in high esteem in the Netherlands in those days. Jacob Katz, of course, talks about the virtuous woman and what she should do, but there's always the remembrance of a virtuous woman. Who can find her? She is worth diamonds and gold, coming from the Bible. And one always thinks, and she stands up early in the morning and goes to bed late, and she she is the head of the household, and also it says that when she marries, a husband who does not give her the keys to the house on the next day is not a worthy man.
Women were important in Bruegel's life. We know women were in Bruegel the elder's life because he had his mother-in-law, and then when he died, it was the mother-in-law looking at the maternal aunts, apparently, that brought up the two boys. I think Bruegel's wife, though, she died quite soon after him, didn't she? She died about 9 years after him, Bruegel's wife, when he died. Yeah. And so the sons were brought up by the maternal aunts, apparently. Women, and it's interesting, the depiction of women in Bruegel the Elder's paintings, you probably noticed that none of them are beautiful and classical. They're all kind of fairly working women, aren't they? Mm-hmm. That's also been brought up. He doesn't idolise women in his paintings. Doesn't put them on a pedestal there. No. But yeah, Dilla greets another question. The idea of the powerful woman.
So I'm looking around if there should be any more questions. Otherwise, maybe we can really move over to the table, because it would be nice to have a really have a look at it.
Try.